Hey, Kim, welcome to the World of Difference podcast.
Hi, Lori. Thank you for having me.
No, it's so much fun to have you on. We actually had scheduled this another time. And even though we both live here in the Bay Area, which is, Silicon Valley and all that, apparently the internet decided to not cooperate and it decided to leave us. So here we are rescheduled. And I'm so glad we could still make it work to get this podcast out, because not only are you a podcaster yourself, but you have so much you're bringing to the table as a coach and as somebody who's had an experience in your career that's really valuable. So today we're going to talk all things career, and we're going to talk about managers, and we're going to talk about the differences you bring to the table and the difference you're trying to make, which is super exciting. So first, I just want to give you a chance to tell us a little bit about who you are. Who are you, Kim? What is your background? What cultures have formed you? And what inspired you to kind of go into the career that you're in?
Thank you. So many good questions. So I am a life coach, a leadership coach. I am the host of the New Manager podcast, helping people become better managers and very human-centered leaders. In terms of how I got here and some of the influences that have shaped me, so I used to be a lawyer. That was a career journey that I took. I've also been a yoga teacher, a meditation and mindfulness teacher. So that has also informed the path that I've been on. I am half Filipino, which is not always obvious. Sometimes people, suspect like, oh, like it seems like there might be a story about who you are, or you look like someone I know and they were Hawaiian or Filipino or something. But that has been also a part of my upbringing. My mom grew up in the Philippines. She and my dad moved here together. And so all of that has been a part of what has informed both my career journey through different, career stages into becoming a coach now and working with people in different industries with different backgrounds, with different perspectives.
I love that you have so many cultures that are part of who you are. And even just people who grew up in the Bay Area tend to have multiple cultural influences just because we have so much beautiful diversity here in the Bay. And I do know so many Filipinos here, but I did live in Southeast Asia for 20 years and did visit the Philippines on more than one occasion, and had many Filipino friends in Singapore. And it is one of those places, just a very special place. First of all, the mangoes. I don't know. It's just a thing. Are you a mango fan?
I love mangoes. Yes. There's something very special about them.
Very special. Even living in Singapore, they had these dried mangoes that were imported from the Philippines, and my kids were basically raised on those. And so good. I love that you have so much diversity in your own life that has formed who you are, and your own career is full of so much diversity. I know some people today are either becoming managers for the first time, or they're also thinking about changing careers and being in a career pivot. Like you said, you've been a lawyer in the past. Well, I mean, you still have your law degree. So in some ways, you're always bringing that into your work. And so as people are stepping into something new, we're going to ask you different questions today, kind of help people who are in those different spaces. The first question I have for you, though, is, because also my role in here in Silicon Valley, I work in leadership development at a tech company, and we met at the California Conference for Women, which is so cool, and had a great conversation there. But when I encounter so many different companies here in the Bay Area with new manager training, it's one of those areas of companies that can be really hard to both implement and maintain as the world and company cultures keep changing. So when you think about somebody creating a whole new manager training, what are the kind of basic parts of that you think are really important that people often don't think about?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because I've seen both how easy it is to simply neglect it, especially at that early first stage managers. Usually the people in an organization who are getting the manager training and the leadership development, they're already experienced. They're often more of the mid-level to senior people. And what I've seen is that it's not as common to invest at earlier stage manager development. They usually get attention after the senior leaders. And so if you're in an organization that has it for, younger managers, for earlier career managers, amazing. That's really great. And the other thing is that even with organizations who want to provide manager training for their people, it's often just a very hard thing to do. And I know you know this from the practitioner perspective also. But one of the things I've really come to appreciate is that, number one, the manager skills that we develop and that we need to be successful in that role, those often start before you have a direct report, before you have an official manager role. And that's stuff like starting to think strategically, developing different communication skills, being able to be flexible in your communication style. All of that you can start to build before you actually get there. And so it can be really hard to get the right level of development support at the right time to the right person. Because very often things are happening, on a day-to-day basis that, people are having to figure out, how do I address this, even though the training that we have is in 3 months, or the training I had was 6 months ago, but I can't remember, what did they say I'm supposed to do in this kind of a situation? So it's often it's a very dynamic kind of experience. And the one other thing I'll share that I often see with new managers, and this also was true for me, which was that we often forget that being a manager is a different job than whatever thing you're good at, whatever functional thing you're good at. So you might be a really great designer, but when you start managing designers, that's a different job. And the mindset shift to that is often something that is not obvious until you get there. And that's when people often need support and they don't have it, because it's just hard to line that up just right for everybody in the organization.
It is. And, I would also think that sometimes job descriptions, as someone who writes job descriptions and hires for my global team, and when I write job descriptions, I'll often look out there, what are job descriptions other places are writing that look similar to this, to give me some kind of, we're always staying at the top of our industry. What are things that are changing in cultures, corporate wide? So sometimes I'll look at other companies and be like, oh, okay, what are they writing for this kind of role? And is there something I should learn about how they write that job description that would help me better at writing job descriptions I write for my team? And sometimes as I look out there, I'll be really aware that when it comes to manager roles, they will list so many things in the job description that are so technical about a project manager role, for example, about the technical knowledge. And yet make or break with that role is somebody's ability to manage the team. And so sometimes I know that people won't even really apply for those roles because it seems so heavy on the amount of information they have to do to, make that product happen. When in reality, they need to be really excellent at managing people on a global team, and have a little bit of understanding, which a lot of people, if they're able to be quick learners, could probably pick up in the first 30, 60 days of that role. But so often we focus so much on the, like you said, the implementation, when that really sets teams up and managers stepping into those roles to not be successful. So what are your thoughts around, even at the point of trying to either promote somebody to a manager role or even hire somebody in for a manager role, that people in those roles could do as they're thinking about who to bring on?
No, I think that's a really great point. I think it's one of those things that often gets missed. And the other thing is, organizations they vary so much, So whether you're a large global organization, whether you're a small nonprofit, whether you are a government agency, like any industry where 2 or more people work together, like the questions around how do I manage the team effectively, those questions are going to come up. And I think part of the art of it is, if you're in the position of making the learning and development happen, it is asking those questions about, what do I want this group of people to focus on? And what are the things that they need to be thinking about, or what do they need to know? And should we include that in the job description so that people realize we want them to be skillful and mindful about these qualities too, not just the technical requirements. I mean, that's also what I love about this space, is because there's such, there's always a need. It's such a dynamic challenge. It's never solved 100%. It's always changing. So, yeah.
Yep. How important would you say it is for a manager to have good communication skills? So if we're going to implement a new manager training, for example, in a company here in Silicon Valley, we'll just take a tech company, for example, and they're working on a new manager training, what percentage of that time, or how many modules out of, however many they have, would you think that would be dedicated to something like the area of communication?
I think there's no right answer to that. In part because I think everyone's appetite for communication skills learning is different. And my philosophy, and I kind of in some sense have the luxury of working outside the organization. So the way I get to approach the challenge is different. Like I pretty much only work with people who are self-motivated and raise their hand and say, I want to do a good job as a manager. I know this is something I can develop some skills around. I know I have a hard time being direct or having these conversations, and I want to learn how. So I have a bit of the bias of I right now I only get to work with people who are sort of self-selecting in that way. When I was working internally in corporate, it was quite different because we had multiple stakeholders we were trying to satisfy. We had different kinds of people, some of whom didn't really want manager training, right? So,
Right.
if you're working internally, I think the question is always, do the best with what you have, knowing nothing is perfect, nothing is complete, and really thinking about the learning journey as something that's going to be ongoing. To the extent that you can plan to have additional support for people who want it, then put those things into place. To the extent that you can identify who are the people that this really is an issue for them, whether it's a blind spot that they don't realize and they don't value. Because sometimes I feel like we see that a lot in tech, is people get so focused on the technical skill, they sometimes forget to recognize the value of the communication skills, and they don't realize how much that helps everything happen better. But there's just so much variability. I think it's such a hard question to answer in a way that would be true across organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. You have heard what I've probably heard as well, is that the statistics show the reasons people leave a job, right? So when we're looking at that kind of research that's been done. And, managers are really a key part of people's experience in the workplace. Every employee who reports to a manager, however that relationship goes, will determine how long they stay, how psychologically safe they feel, which, Google in their Project Aristotle identified psychological safety as the key factor for good, successful teams. But for managers who aren't great at cultivating psychological safety, for example, they potentially will have people leave their team and their attrition rate would be pretty high. And people say sometimes, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. And so from your experience, what have you seen in that realm, and how can we be helpful to managers that want to get better?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, because every time I've taught a class and I've asked that question, have you heard that phrase, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers? I ask, who's heard that? Everybody raises the hand. I ask, who has actually left a job because of their manager? A bunch of hands go up. Who here knows someone who left a job because of the manager? The hands go up. So that's not a secret, right? Everybody knows that the relationship with your manager has a huge effect. And yet, at the same time, there are so many people who are craving, who really want manager development and, are struggling to get it, which I think is always fascinating. The other thing I love about that question, though, is that the reverse is also true. People stay because they have such a great relationship with the manager, because they feel supported, because they feel set up to succeed. Because even if the industry or the company is going through a hard time, if there is a really great relationship with their manager and their day-to-day feels good, stable, supported, set up for growth, people will stay. So I like to also look on that side, because there are things we can learn about what are those managers doing? Who is that manager that you had, that you stayed even though maybe there was another opportunity, maybe it was a little more money, but maybe you really valued that relationship so much that you decided it would be worth it for you to stay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I really have seen that in my career, and as I was coming into the current role that I'm at, I was often asked about, my previous career life, as happens when you start into a new role. And one of the things I often said in those early days was, trust is built. It's not something that's automatically given in most situations, especially just in a work culture. And so we're trying to figure out how to trust each other. And we do that through these very small moments. And that's what Brene Brown says anyway in her research. But at the same time, um, the leaders that build trust, the leaders that build psychological safety on their teams, in my experience in my career, coming from international relief and development, I did tsunami relief in Indonesia, and I was under a civil war zone in the work that I did in my early years right out of grad school. And what my experience told me was that people will walk through fire for a leader that they trust and they believe in, and that gives them that psychological safety. And if you add on top of that somebody who has career conversations with you, who's not just going to mentor you, but sponsor you, because what we see is that women are often over-mentored and under-sponsored. And so when we see leaders doing that, it's amazing how loyal people will be, how that person will impact not only their career, but their life in so many ways. And it is a really beautiful thing to see, because we have two options at work. We can either do this the easy way or the hard way. And the hard way, it is still hard to build those things, but the outcomes are so much better, and people flourish in those environments. When you think about the journey of women in particular in the workforce, I know there's been a lot written out there about, McKinsey's done research for the past 10 years on women in the workforce, and consistently over the last 10 years, it's this bottom rung. It's that individual contributor to manager that women have a hard time being seen as capable of, because of all the stereotypes that we have, even women have. We do performance reviews, and sometimes those tend to have gendered stereotypes embedded in them. And so if someone's listening and they really want to be that sponsor for the woman, not just the mentor, but the sponsor, they want to help her in her career, they want to help see her get from individual contributor to manager or wherever she's at, what advice do you have for people listening on how to kind of overcome those barriers we all face and helping women get where they want to go?
Yeah, I think helping people see themselves as ready and capable. And the idea too that we're not going for perfect, we're going for process. So, I'm sure you've seen these studies too. You take a job description, you put it in front of a woman, you put it in front of a man. The man's like, hey, I've got 3 out of 10. Awesome. Like, I'll learn the other 7. You put it in front of a woman, she's like, oh my gosh, I only have like 8 of those. I don't have all of them. So I'm not ready. So I think anything to help, orient the internal story towards readiness and towards capability. Like, you're capable of this. Just because you haven't done it before, here are the reasons why I can see you being really good at this. The other thing I think is important, this is something I'm curious if you've also seen this, but especially I think with women, there's often a conversation, there's often a thought of, well, I'm already working so hard at my current level. If I level up to a higher level of responsibility, will that require that I give more time, more energy? And will that create giving up things that I care about, like personal time, like family time? And I think there's often what I've seen is this hesitation to also put oneself forward because they fear what it will cost them. And sometimes the conversation is, well, you'll have to, what got you here won't get you there. So the way that you're going to do that job will be different. But the assumption is that I don't want to go for more because it will take more. And I don't want to give more of myself to my job. I'm already giving so much.
Yeah, no, I've heard those narratives. I've experienced those narratives myself. And I think that what often happens in a workplace is that even when we look at executive women, just anecdotally, and we compare them to some of the executive men that we're looking at and seeing how they work, it often appears as though the women are doing so much more, even at the same level as a man. I mean, whether it's true or not, it appears that way, right? So we have a lot of that emotional labor at work that women are expected to bear. You know, so and so's having a bad day, she's struggling. The woman is sent to do that because women, we just, our culture shows us these stereotypes and kind of raises us with them that when a man walks into a room, he's competent. And when a woman walks into a room, she's warm. So men are having to show that they're warm and women are having to show that they're competent, right? And so it's just these narratives that we constantly, work against, the stereotypes. But I do think that often some of that labor at work that women aren't either getting credit for or getting paid for, and then often even that's not promotable, these non-promotable tasks. We do see them a lot in women implementing, even at the executive level on occasion. And so my personal experience has been that I think some of those narratives are there because it's both true and not true. That there is a little bit of truth in that, and that you would have to maybe be doing more at a greater level with more responsibility and more people on your team, especially the emotional labor, because the more people that scale and report to you, chances are you're going to get asked to go in and help them walk through the well-being aspect of work. And so, but at the same time, there's only so many hours in a day and there's only so many hours in a week. And so one of the best coaching I've gotten from executive women who've mentored me and sponsored me is that, drawing strong boundaries that can be flexible when they need to be is really so important for women as we rise in our careers, maybe even more so because of those things that will get thrown our way and we'll be expected to do.
Absolutely. I think that's what also is so, rewarding for me and why I've been so focused on new managers, right? Because we want the sooner you learn that skill set, the sooner you learn that mindset, the sooner you kind of understand, oh, this is what will be expected. I'm going to start to change that narrative. I'm going to start to, exercise some agency in a way that might feel uncomfortable, but I can start finding low risk situations to start doing that and start doing it now, right? Rather than I'm going to, absorb and make it work and extend myself until I get to a breaking point, which is, I feel like that's something I want to help see less of and instead start to shift that. I think that's also why it's so important and why I get encouraged when I see organizations bringing coaching in to all levels of folks, not just the executive levels, but let's start to equip people earlier in their careers with that.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Because, new managers in particular need coaching because you don't know what you don't know. And especially if the new manager training is hard and difficult to create and implement, you really need it, right?
Yeah. And the other thing that often happens is that, the higher up you go, the less time your manager has for you. Right. So sometimes there's that expectation of, okay, now that I'm a manager, will my boss have more time to mentor me, sponsor me, support me, help me learn? And often they realize, oh my gosh, my manager is even more busy or they're even more, overcommitted. And then there's that feeling of who can I go to if it's not my manager? So yeah, coaching is so great for that.
It absolutely is. I'm sure you hear so many things from so many industries at your level. Well, I want to dip into a little bit. Another, part of what you do is if somebody's in a career pivot, for example, some people find themselves in industries that maybe AI is taking over and they're finding that they need to find a new industry that's going to be more long-term for them, or maybe they're just at a point in their career where they just want a new challenge or whatever. And so if somebody's in a career pivot, and they're trying to find a new space for themselves, what are some of the first things you would tell them to start thinking of and start doing as a coach?
Yeah, getting curious. I think often we think we have to have the answer, and actually tapping into your curiosity and being willing to not know, that's often what will help the most. So it doesn't have to be like a one-to-one lateral move. I'm going from this to this title in this industry. You actually want to open up the curiosity because there might be something that you would love to do, but you don't know what it's called, or you don't know what it looks like, in this size organization or in this different industry. So take the pressure off to be curious, do some exploration, have conversations with other people. And that sounds so simple and basic, but it really will be helpful because not only are you starting to activate and engage with your network, and those are also people who can help connect you with opportunities or point you in a direction that you might not be aware of. But it's also just a way of realizing like, oh, other people too are also figuring out career journey. It might not be like a perfect linear thing, and it might be something that you discover as you go, but just start there. Like be curious and have conversations with people.
No, those are great advice. I think almost every job I've ever gotten, with a few exceptions, have been because of people I knew. And as somebody who works to recruit people onto my team, and I'm always trying to grow and scale my team at my work, it's always a bit of a risk when you hire somebody that you don't know and that doesn't know anybody at all. And I have done that in the past, and they've been great hires. They've been wonderful. But you always feel a little bit nervous if you didn't actually know them, because you think, I think I know this person. We've interviewed them. My team's interviewed them. They interview great. But when you know people in a network, it really does help. And people can say, oh, I know this person. I met her here. We've known each other, worked with each other for years, or I met this person at a conference. Anything like that can be really helpful when you're trying to get into a new role. And it makes sense, right? We all have heard stories about hiring people that just didn't work out, or maybe we've had those experiences. And so we wanted to set people up well. And so I think that's why sometimes people on the hiring end feel like it's very risky to not know that person. I can understand that. And so as somebody is trying to network, and that can be a hard thing to do sometimes, especially I'm an extrovert, so I find it a little bit easier than some people, but I've known many introverts who find it completely overwhelming to just reach out to people, to have coffee or things like that. What is your advice when it comes to networking for people who might be a little bit hesitant to do that?
Yeah, I love that question, especially because we met at a conference, like in a networking context. So one is, so I definitely identify as an introvert, and the mindset shift that really helped me was realizing as an introvert, I also like connecting with people, but I like to do it just one at a time, which is actually perfect because when you are connecting with someone and having a conversation, you just do it one person at a time. And that made it start to feel a lot more accessible to me. And it made me think, I'm actually good at networking. It just looks different for me than for my very extroverted friend, right? So you want to embrace the approach that will work with your personal communication style and your comfort level. On terms of a very practical thing, I love Calendly for scheduling with people. It makes it super easy. And so you can create this really simple, method or tool to invite people into a conversation. And it doesn't have to be long. It might just be a 20-minute conversation. So thinking in terms of who can I invite into a conversation? The question, depending on who the person is, might be, hey, we worked together 10 years ago. I would love to reconnect and hear what you're doing now or what you're seeing in your side of the industry now. It can be, I see that you work at this company. I have been looking at that company too. I would be so interested to hear what your experience has been like there. Would you be open to chatting with me here? And if so, here's an easy way to schedule time. So thinking it as extending an invitation, remembering that people like being helpful. Like it feels good to be helpful. Some people will not take you up on it, and that is okay. Right? Like when you can be a safe place. This is also like part of my boundaries teaching, my boundaries lesson, right? When you are a safe place for someone to say, oh, no, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, but no, that's part of boundaries practice, right? Like you feel comfortable saying a no, you feel comfortable receiving a no. So find small ways to let it feel accessible, easy. A little discomfort is okay, but also remembering this is something that's going to be beneficial for everybody in the conversation.
Yeah, that's such good advice. Yeah, very, very, very practical and helpful. As we're thinking about organizations, and there's there's a bit of hiring going on now. I know I've hired a couple of people in the last couple months for my team, and there's just a lot of growth going on, especially when it comes to AI, which is really exploding here in tech, and my company is involved in that too. And we think about how leadership is going in the future in organizations. I don't know if you get this question, but I get this question quite a bit because of working in leadership and development. Do you think AI is going to take over our jobs? And so my standard answer is, just be human. The more human you are, the less risky that is, right? The more you do humanity and be a human leader well, it seems like that's not going to go away. But what are some of the things that you tell leaders or people that are managing about being more human, about embracing who we are as people and treating people with humanity as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think that okay, the truth is it's optional. And I like to remind people of this because you're going to encounter people in the course of your career who do not treat you like a human or who do not offer grace or a desire to help you learn and thrive. And I actually think it's helpful to realize that being human centered and wanting to treat people well and to be a human, that's a choice. Right? And so much of leadership is about what are the choices we make and why. So you always have that choice. That choice is always available. And I personally am betting on humanity. So I think that, for people in leadership and development, I think that the skills and the mindset and the ability to navigate uncertainty, to have both compassion as well as, like the practical accountability of how do we get things done together. I think that combination will only become more valued and more important if we want to create something sustainable and effective where people want to work together and people are bringing the best and bringing out the best in each other. And at the same time, I realize that is an option that not every person will choose. So if you find yourself, like, for your listeners, if you find yourself working in an environment where you realize, I think the leadership here, or I think my manager is not prioritizing the human part of this, that's just good to know, right? And then you might start thinking about it. Maybe it will be time for me to think about an exit strategy.
Yes, good advice. Clarity is kindness, as they say, right? And it is true that once you get that clarity, then you can make your choices. And there's a lot of options when it comes to work. And that's the role that you can play, is helping people when they're trying to find those options. Do you have any stories in your practice as a coach of how you've helped people walk through a transformation similar to that in your coaching, you were able to really see them get from A to B when it felt like they didn't know how?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I had a client who felt like she was trapped in a box. She liked her organization, but she'd been there for a long time and she wasn't feeling like there was an opportunity for growth. She was just kind of repeating the same thing year after year and feeling stagnant, feeling like she wasn't being recognized for what she was capable of. She was just being, like offered the same kind of thing. And because she'd felt like she really had to keep herself small in this role, she knew she wanted something else. But the questions were, it's like, at least I know what I'm dealing with here. you've ever heard people say like, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. It's like
Yeah.
the trade-off people make of, this might not be great, but at least I know what is not great about it. So she had to overcome that fear of, well, what if I go to something else and it's worse? She had to go through the fear of, am I actually not capable of more? Since I've been doing this for so long, have I kind of stagnated? Is it possible for me? And then the question of, will anybody else see me as that higher level role that I want, that I'm not in yet? Like, will I be able to, convince them, which is what it felt like at the time. Like, I'll have to convince them. And where do I start? She's like, I've got a family and I've got this job. And it feels so overwhelming. And so in the work that we did together, which was number one, a lot about kind of accepting and allowing for all of the emotions, finding ways to reframe what felt hard, to look at it in a way that made it start to feel a little bit lighter, tapping into the creativity that was that she used every day, right? And realized that creativity can also help her get creative about how she might find something that's a better fit. And one of the things that really, for her was a big shift was the realization of, I'm really good at figuring things out. I'm really good at learning. Like, look at all of this education. Look at all the things I've had to figure out in my life. This just becomes something else that I can figure out. And so from there, she started to initiate different conversations with people in her network. She started to get curious, like, what's happening over there? I wonder, what are they seeing? Like, what would really work for me and my family? Getting really clear about what she wanted, and then letting some of that judgment and the fear start to fall away. And what happened was, she said it went from feeling like she was trapped in a box to like she had climbed out and she was sitting in the branches of this big, beautiful tree, and she could see this bigger landscape and perspective. And it suddenly felt like she had choices, and they were good choices. And from that place, she was able to find and land a new position. And actually, it's like her first CEO role. So she made a significant jump. And it's very aligned, like it's purpose aligned for her. It allows her to have the, family life and work life, because we also worked on boundaries and how to make sure that you're not taking, work home and letting it kind of bleed into all of your life. And so it was really beautiful to see that transition, and to see that, even when you feel trapped for all of these reasons that seem like really fixed reasons, it's often the smallest shifts that start to untangle the things that feel so knotted, right?
Wow. That's so beautiful. And I'm just so grateful for you and all the coaches out there that help us work through these knotted up situations in our careers and as managers. And that's a really beautiful story that helped us open up our own imagination of what could be. So if anybody's out there feeling trapped in a box, please reach out to Kim. If you're a new manager and you're looking for help, please reach out to Kim. And Kim, how can they find you and more of your writing and your work and your podcasting?
Yeah. So if you listen to the New Manager podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, that is like my free audio library that will help you have a better day at work today, just based on, like what's in that show. So definitely go there. That will help you right away. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, and I post there about work and life. And if you want to know more about working with me, my website is kimnicol.com, and you can go there and schedule some time for us to talk.
Yes, that's so great. Please reach out to Kim. She's wonderful. She was the coach assigned to me at California Conference for Women, and we had a great conversation and we stayed in touch. And you've really been helpful to me with some advice that you gave me during that conference. So I can vouch for Kim. She's awesome. And hopefully this conversation today has also given you some tools to take away. So please check out her podcast, reach out to her for help. And as far as this podcast goes, we're going to say goodbye to our listeners around the world that listen to this all over the world, and have hopefully gained some insight from you today. I'm sure they have. But we're asking you to stick around for our difference maker community, which is where we go a little bit deeper with our guests. I'm going to ask you another question there just to go a little bit deeper. And everybody's welcome to join us over there at patreon.com/a world of difference. But thank you for being on today, Kim.
Thank you for having me.